Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We are probably on the last class or the next to the last class of this book, Divine Friendship by Swami Kriyananda. It's been a really great experience. I hope you've enjoyed it as I have. Let's now say a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dear Swamiji, bless us with deep awareness of your presence within us. Help us to read your words and through them receive your consciousness. We are ever seeking deeper attunement, greater joy, everlasting freedom. Show us the way. Om. Peace. Amen. We're going to have a little chanting, a few moments of silence, and then we'll start.
Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine Mother, 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 my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine Mother, 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 my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine Mother, 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 my divine mother. guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Shri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Shri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Shri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Hare Krishna Hare Rama, Shri Radhe Govinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Hare Krishna Hare Rama, Shri Radhe Govinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Hare Krishna Hare Rama, Shri Radhe Govinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Hare Krishna Hare Rama, Shri Radhe Govinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Hare Krishna Hare Rama, Shri Radhe Govinda. Shri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions.
Om, peace. Amen. Okay, my friends, we are in the last few pages of the section Seek Ye First the Kingdom of God, which is the last section of this wonderful book of letters. I remember when my friend Nidruva, Sheila Rush, who collected these letters, she brought the manuscript down from Ananda Village where she lived to here in Palo Alto where I live, and she was a bit tired of the book at that point, needed a little bit of a break, and she left the manuscript with me, and I had the great pleasure of trying to divide it up into sections, which was a lot of fun, just figuring out that did she already have it? She may have already had it in sections, and then I just arranged the letters within each one, but I had the whole manuscript out on the floor and sorting through and helping figure out what would be the best order. She worked on it, it was her book. I just sort of helped her through that a little. Then we carried the manuscript to Swami, to Goa. He was in India, and I went with him to be on holiday with him in Goa, as I did for a number of years. A group of us, he took usually about 10 of us with him. And he sat and then he edited the book. Of course, the writing was his, but now that it was going to be published, he went through it pretty carefully and just smoothed out, made sure everything was what he wanted it to be. And I typed it up. It was the book had even though I wasn't really the author or the editor, I got to play a small part in it in the end. So I've always loved it, and I've loved it especially going through it like this. So we're on a letter from February 28th of 1990, and it was the deeper meaning of two dreams. So I read the first paragraph last time, but I'll read it again just so you'll know. Your dreams are significant. They show that you need to get back to basics, to make a greater effort to put God first in your life. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Why was Mother Teresa part of your dream? It doesn't mean you need to seek her out or become part of her work. It means that her life represents a dedication to service, and that is what needs strengthening in your life. I read that last week, and now starting with the new part. The roses in the dream represent your devotion, which has been wilting. Revive them in your heart with more meditation, more service, and more attunement with God, Guru, and your Gurubhais. Master said that of all the flowers, roses have the highest astral vibration. So roses would, in the Kriya ceremony, initiation into Kriya, rose petals play a part. And in many of our ceremonies, we scatter rose petals. In the wedding ceremony, the couple exchanges roses, because Master said it, as I said, it's the most refined vibration. Don't nurse hurts needlessly in your heart. If others seem less generous toward you than you would like them to be more generous toward them. I love the way Swami uses that word. Don't nurse hurts, which is one thought. If others seem less generous to you than you would like them to be, that really covers a lot of different things, doesn't it? People are being less generous. They're being less forgiving, less understanding, less supportive, less enthusiastic. Just be more generous in return. That is the way to victory. Indeed, I know that everyone wishes you well and wants the very best for you. Perhaps this person has written to Swami that others have a bad opinion of him. Swami's correcting that. The pains God sends us are for our welfare. Take them as his blessings, for they are as much signs of his love for us as his more gratifying gifts. I love Swami's language. Pains he sends us are also, and then he refers to as much as our more gratifying gifts. Some of the things God sends us are more gratifying. It's such a simple way to put it. Be generous to others, even if they're not generous to you. And some gifts from God are more gratifying. They match what we ourselves think we want. They match what we think of as pleasure. They match what we think of as reward. But everything that comes to us is equally from God. How could it be otherwise? It's equally karmically exact. It's equally a sign of how much God loves us. That's very, very hard to comprehend. Everything wants the world to conform to our preconceptions of it. The divine path is quite different. I pray for your spiritual growth and happiness in God. But first, Swami prays for his growth. So whoever this person is, whatever they're suffering from, Swami feels that they've let down their perseverance, they've let down their energy in terms of pursuing God. And Swamiji wants them to go forward again in Master's love. This letter is about God's grace surrounds you. It was written in 1975. Do not feel discouraged, but continue to meditate and practice Kriya. Just even that, you can just tell whoever it was wrote, I don't think I'm getting very far. I don't think I'm doing things right. I'm losing hope. I'm losing energy. Don't feel discouraged, Swami says. Persevere. Master always taught us to affirm success, and in that affirmation, we become stronger in our relationship, in our realization too. Master always taught us to affirm success, and in that affirmation, we become stronger in our realization too. God's grace surrounds you. It's so hard to realize that, isn't it? And it's Jean Vianney, who was a French priest. He made the statement, which we often quote, if you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. And yet we are constantly believing that in some way or another we are failing, and therefore we are distant from God, and we feel lonely and bereft. It's never true, because we are inherently a part of the divine. We can never separate ourselves, but we can block that realization. That's why Swami said Master always wanted us to be affirmed, to affirm our spiritual success, because that very affirmation helps us to realize that God is always with us, because it's delusion to think He's not. God's grace surrounds you. Try to share your every thought and feeling with Him. It is amazing how one's consciousness changes in this practice. Just to recognize that you're not alone. You know, many people want to have an intimate friend or companion, some close person that they can love and be loved by. But the fact of the matter is, we have that already, but we don't relate to it. And it's a little more subtle than a physical person, but also it's more pure and more deeply fulfilling to always know that grace surrounds us. It's true that it is difficult work to try for a goal and live wholly in the present. I guess the person was saying, how do I, keep my eye on God realization and not live in the future and not keep track of where I am now? The Bhagavad Gita gives us this clue, Nishkam Karma, to act without desire for the fruits of action and only to please God. Indeed, we cannot do our best unless in our hearts we are free. Do everything joyfully, remembering that God is a God of joy. My goodness, we could live by just one of these letters. Act without desire for the fruits of action. Nishkam Karma, that's one of the biggest lessons of the Bhagavad Gita. Do it only to please God. What else would I do? That's just sort of, sometimes the question is, what else would I really do? I mean, this is sadhana. This is the pathway to the divine. We know where we're going. We have progressed too far down the path of surrender and devotion to God to ever be able to turn back to the world. But we haven't yet reached that goal. And so this is the long cycle in the middle, where we have to affirm our success. We have to affirm that God is close to us. We have to affirm that the path will result in the joy and freedom I'm seeking. And then we still just have to keep pushing forward. Share every thought with God. I mean, just imagine at first, and then imagination gives way to realization. Do everything joyfully, remembering that God is a God of joy. It sometimes helps to get it just really simple. This is, am I happy? And how can I change my consciousness so that I will be feeling and expressing joy? Why do I not like what I'm doing? Why am I complaining about my circumstances? Why do I feel bereft and incomplete? And we can give answers to that, but then why? Why? Who am I really? Where does happiness come from? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. This letter says, serve a dying relative with joy. This was January 2002. I'm sorry about your mother's slow decline. Try to keep your mind on God when you are with her. This will help her as she approaches the end of life. It's always a very difficult thing when, especially elderly relatives, really begin to go in the last stages of their lives, whether it lasts a couple of years or whether it's days or weeks. We're just in this position where I was actually talking to some friends who are caught in that now, where one of the parents is suddenly just taking a turn that's very, very difficult. Both parents are elderly, and when we were talking together, we were saying to each other, there are no good choices, because there is nothing that is going to reverse this situation and make it. We're not all going to become 20 again. You know, the sands of time are running out. Old age, disease, and death comes to everyone. This was why the Buddha renounced the world. His father, at his birth, there was a prediction that the Buddha would either become a great renunciate or he would become a great king. And the king wanted him to become a great king. So he determined that he would give his son no cause, no incentive to renounce the world. And he controlled his son's entire life. You know, when you read the beautiful poem, The Light of Asia, which is a wonderful poetic description of the life of Buddha, and it describes how, you know, everyone around the Buddha was young and healthy. If there was the slightest sign of sickness, that person disappeared from the palace. The flowers were not allowed to wilt. All the flowers were taken away and fresh flowers put every day, so that he never was exposed to the inevitable decline of every living thing, until he got his friend, his chariot driver, to take him outside the walls of the palace where his father had kept him confined. And he was startled to see sickness. He was startled to see aging people, and he was stunned to see a body that was lifeless, old age, disease, and death. And when he heard from his friend, his companion, that there was nothing spectacular about the presence of these things, that it was the fate of all living creatures, that all men and women will enter into those stages inevitably. And then the Buddha said, well, why am I wasting my time? He said, I must find the secret. I must find a way. Everything is meaningless because of this. And then his father's worst fear was realized, and he renounced the world. So here we are in this particular letter. This person is having to take care of their dying mother. And, you know, there's nothing that can be done. Death is going to come, period. There's no way to change reality. So he says simply, try to keep your mind on God when you are with her. In other words, create an uplifted vibration which will allow her also to accept with equanimity and with joy this closing out of the lifetime. And the vibration of God's presence will put her mind on where she's going, not on what she's leaving behind. In the Bible story of Martha and Mary, Martha still gains spiritually for her service to Jesus. She simply could have gained more if, while serving, she had kept her mind on God. That's a very important part of the Martha-Mary story. It's not that Martha wasn't doing what she needed to do. It was that she was allowing her mind to drift away from the divine. She was allowing herself to become anxious, concerned, and unhappy. And also, when Swami would ever talk about the story of Martha and Mary, Martha was taking care of all the guests, and Mary was just sitting at the feet of Jesus. And Jesus said, well, Mary has chosen the I'm not quite sure exactly what the word is, but what he meant was the more important part, which is if you're going to serve with your mind drawn away from God, or if you're going to sit in contemplation, remembering God is the higher path. However, while serving, you can also remember God. That is the key. And Swami has often said, it's not clear in the Bible whether or not Jesus told Mary to go help her sister. Because he might have said, Mary, go help Martha. Look at her. She's working so hard all by herself. This work has to be done. It's not in the Bible, but who's to say he didn't say that? Because what he was talking about was consciousness, not action. So perhaps this person is also saying, here I am taking care of my mother. Looks like it's going to be a slow decline. I have to, it's a day and night job. I don't have time for my hours of meditation like I had before. I don't know if any of that's true, but it could easily have been said. So Swami says, keep your mind on God. Martha and Mary, Martha served. Her service was essential. Just keep your mind on God while you're doing it. And even the complaint about why do I have to do this, it's taking me away from my spiritual practice, is taking you away from your spiritual practice. It's not serving that's taking you away. It's forgetting God while you're serving. And complaint and feeling you're being mistreated is the easiest and fastest way to forget about God. So, this you can do while you assist your mother. Serve with joy. Think of being a channel for God's joy. Very simple. Someone wrote and said, I'm stuck here taking care of my mother. What should I do? Serve with God's joy. I mean, that's a generic piece of advice for every single thing that we're ever asked to do, isn't it? Keep your mind on God. Serve with God's joy. The path gets very simple. It doesn't mean that it's easy, but it gets very simple. And it's important to recognize how simple it is, because otherwise we spin with all these complicated ideas in our minds, and we never really find our way. Nishkam karma, do it to please God. Don't do it for ourselves. This letter is in April 2001. On the spiritual path, attitude is everything. So here we are again with the same lesson. As devotees, our first question should be, how can I come closer to God? Not, why is my work not being appreciated? Well, those are pretty big opposites, aren't they? Yeah, that spiritual path is not easy. Why is my work not being appreciated? I think you should think more about being close to God. As I've said through this whole episode, whatever the episode is, I'm perfectly willing for my music to be forgotten by everybody. So somehow there was, around 2001, there was kind of a kerfuffle in the department that Swami had set up to be in charge of recording and disseminating his music. As I've said, if that's so, but anyway, I'm not sure who wrote this. As I've said through this whole episode, I'm perfectly willing for my music to be forgotten by everybody. But I am not, and he puts not in capital letters here, but I am not willing that anyone lose spiritually by serving in the cause of reaching people with it. So there was and is a certain amount of kerfuffle going on, and Swami was protecting the spiritual well-being of people. If it's the kerfuffle I'm thinking about, the whole department was dismantled for a time because it was not, people had gotten, there were a couple of people in particular, one in particular, had just gotten too confused about what he was really supposed to be doing with his life. Actually, I think these are unrelated incidents. I'm mixing things up. My concern has been for this certain person's attitudes. Every time he replies to anything, it is always on a worldly level of things planned, done, etc. My concern is centered in the fact that I never hear him speak like a devotee. I don't want a business. I want a service to God in others. That's a really good point. So I take back, I'm not really quite sure what the struggle was. There's several people through history that I can imagine. I know sometimes when we've talked about the books over the years, trying to disseminate Swami's books and get, sell more books. The nice way to think of it is we want more people to read Swamiji's books. Instead of thinking that we want to sell more books, what we want is more people to read them. And the reason we want more people to read them is because they're filled with wisdom and inspiration. And if more people read them, then perhaps more people will be inspired. If we have Swami's music to sing or to perform or to sell recordings of it, what we want is for the music to, inspire and to reach the consciousness of as many people as possible. That may mean that albums have to be sold, but what we're trying to work with is we're trying to disseminate Master's teachings. It's a very important shift. When Swamiji found himself at the age of 36, outside of the monastery where he expected to spend the rest of his life, and he was cut off from everything that was related to serving his guru. He had no context at all, just himself and his discipleship. And from that nothing, he built everything up again. But whenever he needed money, he always did something to serve people. He gave more classes, he wrote a book, he made an album. Whatever he did, he never did anything except try to serve his guru and spread his mission. And doing it in a practical way so that the money that was needed could come in. But his goal was never to get the money. It was to serve more. It was always to serve more, to reach more people, to share more teaching. He was motivated because he needed that. But what he actually did was try to share the teachings. And it's a mindset that especially someone who's working in the ashram, but in all the work that we're doing, how can I serve? How can I uplift people? What have I done today that has created more joy in the world? And even if you're just alone writing computer code and you never even talk to anyone, do it joyfully, because God is the God of joy. And the vibrations of our consciousness radiate out from this world and create fields of energy that have an effect far greater than we know. And everything we do with a joyful attunement to God has some of that vibration in it. And it permeates out. Don't ever think that your consciousness is insignificant. Don't ever judge it by external measure. Just be within yourself, as attuned as you're able to be, and trust that that will be your service. Attitude is everything to me, not what people do or how well they do it. We're here for God alone. Everything else is just fillers. If the spirit isn't right, it's better to drop everything into the ocean and just meditate. On multiple occasions, Swami, well, it didn't come up multiple times, but Swami, whenever it was necessary to choose between right consciousness, right attitude, and some kind of a worldly inclination, he would just always choose right attitude. And the people, I remember one person particularly that Swami really liked to work with. They said, There are other people who may be more competent and more efficient, he said, but their spirit always inspires me. And that was what mattered to Swami, their spirit of devotion and selflessness and kindness. You can be very efficient, but it's just consciousness that matters. We're here for God. So, February 1983, why God takes things away from us. That's a big question, isn't it? I was saddened to hear of your many trials, Swami writes. Please know that I am praying deeply for you, that you feel God's strength flowing into you and through you. You see, Swami was so natural. He doesn't start by saying, be strong, it's all for the good. He says, I was saddened to hear of your many trials. And he really was. He was very sympathetic. Master wept when his disciples made choices that he knew would cause them suffering and keep them farther away from God rather than drawing closer to him. Master would weep because a tender heart is you're not pleased when people struggle, and you're not cruel in the face of their suffering. Their suffering is sincere. And even if we know it's only transitory, even if he knows it's only transitory, even if he knows it's for your own good, you're still suffering and he feels it. I was saddened to hear of your many trials. Please know that I am praying deeply for you, that you feel God's strength flowing into you and through you. There are times when we may not even be able to meditate. God can still help us, but we must help ourselves too by putting out as much energy as we can to rise above our problems of the moment and to feel that God is indeed shaping our lives in the best possible way for our growth, even when we think that we are at the end of our strength. God never challenges us beyond our ability. Mother Teresa's comment was, I wish God didn't think so much of me. Wish he didn't trust me as much as he does. But it is the truth. And it's a truth that one really needs to meditate on deeply before it happens. One has to develop the mental habit of seeing everything that comes to us that is even slightly challenging, disappointing, aggravating, annoying, all the things that happen. We have to develop the mental attitude as soon as we can catch ourselves to say, no, this is happening for a good reason. God wants me to rise to this challenge, and he will give me the strength. It's called practicing when it's easier. If we don't build that muscle in us, instead we have the habit of complaining and feeling defeated and feeling resentful of what God asks of us and not having faith that it's going to work out, then when really serious trials come, we haven't developed that muscle at all. We'll have to develop it, but it'll be much harder. So train your mind, and don't think there's ever an excuse for anything other than calm acceptance and joy. That's how Swami wrote it in the Festival of Light. Whereas in the past, suffering and sorrow was the coin of man's redemption, for us now that payment has been exchanged for calm acceptance and joy. Those are two magnificent concepts. Calm acceptance, and then joy. But the first step has to be just calm acceptance. Whenever you find yourself responding with anything other than calm acceptance, do your best. Do the best you can to at least mitigate that attitude and turn it in the right direction. Sometimes when we allow ourselves to become too attached to family and to the things of this world, God takes them away from us. That's just so hard to enthusiastically accept. When we become too attached, he takes them away from us. It is to teach us to seek only His love in all things. When we love Him to the best of our ability, He gives us everything we need in life. May you ever feel His love for you. So who knows, maybe this person's separated from their family for some reason against their will. These terrible things happen. And it's easy to say, oh, well, I was too attached. And you can sort of say that theoretically. But the heart still longs for things. This is where, and I'll just say it again, practice when it's easier. So when big tests come, at least you have some idea of which way to turn. So now the last in this book is this, and I just remembered when I was looking at it this afternoon, Swami stuck this in at the end. And someone wrote him these questions. It's about free will, meditation, and self-realization. It's quite a giant letter. I've read it about 100 times, I think, in my life, and I think I'm finally, perhaps, 100 times is an exaggeration. I've read it a dozen times. And this time it made more sense to me than it's ever made before. So if it's a little hard for you to follow, let's just say I've been struggling with this letter for years. I don't know when this book was published. Let me just see. It was published in 2008. So I've had a dozen years to read it. It was written on January 25th, 2007. I think he answered this letter when we were in Goa. This book is 2008. Yeah. So I think this was my recollection, is that this was created after the collection was made. It was either a recent letter or something, and he decided to put it in. So I'll be glad to try to answer your question, Swami said. First question: what exactly do we mean by saying man has been given free will? If all actions are done by God, how is man free? First, soul freedom is a reality, but it must be understood on a deeper level than that of the ego. See, the confusion with free will is that we try to make the ego free, and the ego isn't free. The ego is the definition of bondage and limitation. So we want to say that we have free will, and then we want that free will to apply to the ego, but it can't, for reasons that Swami will explain. Freedom, to begin with, is true only of the soul. Limitations of all kind is the meaning of bondage, and ego consciousness is the greatest limitation of all, from which all others proceed. Ego makes us think we have a separate individual reality. Ego makes us think we have a separate individual reality. I didn't have the word limitation when I was growing up, but when I got onto the spiritual path, I realized that that was what had tortured me all my growing up years, which is that this incredible feeling of limitation, and I didn't understand till I got seriously on the path that in itself was the cause of suffering. There was this intuitive sense of infinite freedom, and there was this daily sense of ego bondage. And most people who haven't become self-realizationists just think that the ego is who we are. So it never crosses their mind that I am the problem. There is a problem, but it's hard to say that, to understand why I am the problem. As waves on the sea appear individual, yet have no lasting reality except as manifestations of the one great body of water, so we ourselves in ego consciousness rise and fall wave-like on the ocean of God's consciousness. Success, so you just start. That image is pretty easy to see. When you see a wave, it's definitely a wave. You can see it. It's doing its own thing. It's coming and going. It's rising and falling. But that wave cannot exist except that the ocean is manifesting it. It's a perfect image for how we live. It's just that our vision is only of the wave, which is me and my ego self, and I don't see how the ocean is moving me. But the concept, at least, can be there. So we ourselves in ego consciousness, we ride, it says, success followed by failure, happiness followed by sorrow, fulfillment followed by frustration, ever subject to the contrasting states of duality. And sometimes the ups and downs don't always occur in quick succession. They may go over the course of a lifetime. They may go over the course of many incarnations, but it's always alternating. No wave remains fixed. It doesn't just rise and stay. And so with us, we don't just reach a certain pinnacle and then nothing moves after that. We're beautiful and young, and then we become old and ill. We love raising our small children, and then they grow up and go away from us. We become deeply attached to a certain reality, and then there's a revolution in our country, and it's completely wiped out. I mean, just something always happens. And when we try to make the movement stay, and we just don't have the will, we don't have the free will to do that. Our separateness from the ocean, however, and even from one another, is a mere appearance. Man may be described as simply a bundle of self-definitions. It's one of Swami's wonderful phrases. We just are, we define ourselves as just all these different things, and none of them are true. Yogananda described divine consciousness as center everywhere, circumference nowhere. Man's limited existence is the circumference formed by his ego self-definition. So we say we are the whole ocean, and then we draw a circle around ourselves. We are one with the greater reality, but I'm especially this one, and I am me and not you. I am human and not animal. I am alive and not dead. I am brilliant, I am gender, I am culture, I am language. And really, we're just a wave on the ocean. When these limiting self-definitions are removed or dissolved, nothing remains to prevent his consciousness from merging into and becoming one with God. In other words, we don't have to accomplish it, we just have to realize it. When you realize something, it was always there. Oh, I realize that you're standing behind me. I realize I have what I need right in my closet. I realize that the money in the bank is sufficient for what I want to do. Nothing has been created. I've just understood what is already there. So when we stop thinking of ourselves as separate, we don't have to create unity. We just remove our misunderstanding. In that stage, it is not that we lose all identity, rather we expand our identity to infinity. That's the distinction. People think if they lose the ego, they'll cease to exist. But what actually happens is that we begin to exist. If we've just always lived in a closet, and then someone opens the door to the closet and we realize we have the whole house, we haven't become less for not living in the closet. But as long as we think the closet's the only reality, we just hunker down in there. And people may knock at the door and tell us there's a whole house, but we don't believe them. This is mental illness, but then we're all mentally ill in regard to the saints, compared to the saints. Being omniscient, it must be added that we retain the memory of having been each one of our separate egos. Having been each one of us a separate ego, that is the oddest thing, isn't it? That's why Jesus Christ can still manifest as Jesus Christ. He's one with the infinite, but if someone wants to see him as Jesus, he can come back as Jesus. Because he has it all. He has the whole picture. You see, being the separate ego is the most contracted. Rather than becoming snuffed out without it, we actually become liberated from it. But the consciousness that we merge into also extends down to its most contracted point. So we can be simultaneously all of it. In this way, Yogananda explained, nothing is lost in the infinite, not even the ego. Fascinating, because we just, that's the picture. If I think of it as an inverted pyramid, and the point of the pyramid is the ego, And when the ego has kind of a lid on it, you take the lid off, and the consciousness expands out to fill, and the pyramid is just stretches out without limit. But it still also inhabits that last little point. So we don't really lose anything, we just become more. We can revive the memory of individual existence again, if ever the divine wills that we return to earth to uplift and save other wandering souls. This is the way an avatar returns. If compassion draws us back to help. Man cannot be free in ego consciousness, except in the sense that his soul consciousness within him can impel him to direct his energies and aspirations toward God or toward Maya. So that is the one choice that we have, that we either just keep reinforcing our separateness, or we can respond to the higher calling and try to break down our separateness and reinforce our oneness. So the soul is called to the infinite, but God does not force us to go there. Everything man does in his egoic state is conditioned by his own past actions and by the countless outside influences to which he is subject. For man is integrally a part of the great web of existence. Egoic individuality is an illusion. If you really try to think, if you try to take your separate individuality and cut it out like a piece of, I give a piece of paper and you cut yourself out of the middle of that, if we, in every direction, we are interconnected. In every direction. Even to be here with the body, there had to be a man and woman who came together in sexual union. Who created them? Why did they come together? Why in that moment was conception possible? Who grew your body in their womb? Who nurtured you when you were a helpless baby? And how did all of those people, and you can trace it all the way back to the beginning of time. And it is a seamless connected web all the way. It's just folly to think of ourselves as separate. Egoic individuality is an illusion. Man has only this much freedom. Man has only this much freedom. His soul, being a part of God, is not separate from infinity. Thus, all of us in our souls have the power either to turn toward God or reject him, to love him or to spurn him. We can't ever be separate from him. That's what Swami's trying to say. We are the ocean of spirit, and we either constantly try to pull our wave higher and higher and get it away from the whole ocean, or we recognize even as we rise that it's the ocean itself that's rising us, not any action of our own. Those are our two choices. We either acknowledge who we are and where our happiness comes from, or we resist. But we cannot create another reality because our oneness is inescapable. This, in essence, is man's only true freedom. Since karma and worldly influences prevent him from expressing that freedom, it must be added that man is free also to the extent that he can free his mind from all habits and separative samskars. So what he's also saying is that even though you can state that we have this choice, we're conditioned by so many things around us, including the momentum we ourselves have set in motion in the past, the culture in which we live, the planetary influences which set the horoscope, which give an inclination to go in a certain way. So we are only free to the extent that we, with willpower and discipline, can pull our mental responses away from all those forces. This is why we don't feel free. Even if we say, oh, well, I'll just renounce the ego, but there's all these other forces that hold us. This is why I've had to read this letter over and over and over. It's just a very hard question. Okay. In other words, if a man is self-controlled, he has greater freedom than someone who is completely bound by habits. If you're just compelled by everything you've always done in eating and sensuality and sleep and your moods and your attitudes, if just whatever comes through you, you just let it float through you without making any effort to exercise what choice you have, then you're completely bound. And you'll just roll on and on for endless incarnations. Good qualities, which are the attributes of sattva guna, the highest, of the three gunas, the most serene, the purest, leading toward the divine. Good qualities, which are the attributes of sattva guna, cannot in themselves bring release from ego. All qualities, however noble, being born of ego consciousness, conceal the inner soul. Now here we are. So we follow the divine way, we live according to the highest virtues, we are generous, we are self-controlled, we are kind, we are all these things. But in and of itself, if we're still identified with if we still see ourselves as the doer, as the one carrying out those actions, as having those attributes, we are still bound. The Gita tells us they hide, but then, okay. So those qualities in themselves are still the attributes of the ego when we exercise them that way. But as the Gita describes us, sattva qualities hide the soul like smoke obscures fire. This is one of the famous verses from the Gita. As smoke obscures fire, you just blow on the smoke moves away, and the fire is revealed. The fire, in this case, being the soul, a little bit of effort. So once we are operating primarily according to sattva guna, when we are behaving in a self-controlled, self-disciplined capacity to choose the highest octave of personal expression, then that is still not the same as God realization yet. But the veil between us and the understanding of the soul is very thin. Sattva guna is like a thin veil covering soul consciousness and concealing it. A little meditative effort is all that is needed in order to blow away the last illusion of egoic separateness. So he's telling us now how to become free. We become free by exercising self-control and therefore choosing the sattvic option in all circumstances. The darkening qualities of tamoguna, the opposite, that which draws us deeper into contraction. Sattva-guna draws us greater into expansion. Tamoguna calls us into contraction. The darkening qualities of tamoguna, on the other hand, form a thick covering which conceals the soul within them as if in deep darkness. The Gita compares tamoguna to an embryo in the womb. Time alone will enable the embryo to emerge into the clear light of day. So he's setting up for us, the two choices that we have. The ego has this much freedom. It can either consistently move in a sattvic direction or it can plunge into tamoguna. If we move into a sattvic direction, the veil becomes very thin. If we plunge into tamoguna, we just have to keep tumbling and tumbling. And the embryo in the womb is no amount of impatience, no amount of I want it to be different, no amount of willpower or anything will cause that embryo to leave the womb as a whole child until the term is run. And so those who are unable to free themselves from karmic compulsions that move them down into tamoguna, we just remain trapped. And every time we choose tamoguna over sattva-guna, then we reinforce, we extend, we thicken the veil and set in front of us, another layer that will have to be removed. So after a while, one begins to realize this is really important. I have to make the right choices. God does indeed do everything, but He also created delusion and operates through the three gunas to bring about His cosmic magic show. God does indeed do everything, but He also created delusion. I don't know why Swami says but He also created delusion and operates through the three gunas to bring about His cosmic magic show. We cannot operate through the ego without becoming intrinsic parts of the cosmic illusion. Hence, in our egos, we are free only to the extent that we turn back, even with great effort, toward God. Only as we shed ego consciousness can we reclaim our divine freedom, which means becoming one with God again. So what he's saying is that God is acting through us, but Maya itself, the pull of the three gunas, the inclination, the karmic law, that's the cosmic drama that God Himself has set up. And the ego, He gives us the opportunity to choose. But no, our will is not free until we have escaped. As long as we're in the ego rules us, and that's not freedom. There is no freedom except in the dissolution of the ego, and that's where the confusion comes in people's minds. I'm not going to try to make it any clearer than that because I can't. Question number 2. How will a person know whether his meditation is proper or not? That is, whether or not he is making good progress. Something everyone wants to know. People so often write and ask, I feel like I'm making no progress. I feel like I'm not doing it right. The more deeply you enjoy the peace of meditation, the more satisfactory will be your progress. And so in other words, we have to cultivate a taste for peace. And bear in mind, you see, we have a habit that is not the habit of peace. We're always looking for distractions, and our society, I really think the only word for it is satanic, and I'll just use the word. There's a tremendous satanic influence in our society, which is this absolute effort to keep us always stimulated and not uplifted in our stimulation, but just distracted and very often in a profound and deep way pulled down. The modern music, the modern art, so to speak, modern entertainment, current, what's going on, all of it is designed to pull us into our senses and to pull our minds down, and the absolute opposite of peace. Just the opposite. I was riding my bicycle today, and I was behind, there's a lot of bicyclists where I live, and I was behind this woman, and we were pretty much at an even pace, and I was fairly close to her, but although I dropped back after a moment, I got sort of close to her, and I realized that she had a radio playing, not with earbuds, but just playing. Or radio, I say radio, some kind of a musical thing. And it was just playing music that I found exceedingly unpleasant, with just a hard beat and very raucous sounds, not at all nice. And it was so funny to me because I was so enjoying just, moving. We have a lovely climate here, moving through the air, the late afternoon air, and just the sort of sense of freedom. And I was doing japa and just all of that. And she didn't even want to ride her bicycle without this sound going on in her ears. And I thought, wow. And that's just so common, isn't it? You pull up to buy gas in the gas station, and now there's a little video screen, that's trying to sell you that stuff or show you something. And I remember when I landed at the Los Angeles airport, and I had to cross, 4 lanes of traffic to get to the island where I could get a taxi or something like that. And it was an open air thing, but there was kind of a roof over it. And I realized that there was some kind of a speaker up here. Now there's 4 lanes of traffic on either side of me. And there's a roof with a speaker trying to play some kind of awful, to my ear, sounds coming down on me. And I thought, why? Because, as my dear friend Anandi put it, because the motto of this age is never be alone with your thoughts. Never, never. And so, the society is helping you to make sure that we're never alone with our thoughts. So it's very hard to cultivate an affection for peace. So it's not just that, I'm just going to someday, I'm just going to really start enjoying the peace. No, you have to cultivate an affection for peace so that you can enter into that state when you meditate and enjoy it. You can't even enter it if your mind is always just spinning. We have to work at this. Spiritual advancement can be judged also by how free you feel from the constant goading of egoic individuality, the hurts, whether large or small, the pains of life, both physical and mental, the desire for recognition, fame, worldly power and importance, by how little you refer your painful or pleasant experiences back to yourself, thinking, I am the one suffering, or exulting. So these are the other ways that you can tell how much do you enjoy the peace of meditation, and how much are we constantly calculating our own position. I am suffering, I am happy, I am being recognized, I am not being appreciated, I am tired, I am hungry, I want to, I don't want to. Just how much. I remember when I first came to Ananda and I first started working, and I was running the retreat kitchen, which was also the community kitchen at the time. And I was doing it almost single-handedly. And it was 6 days a week. I cooked 3 meals for about 35 or 40 people, with a little bit of help, but not much. On the day that the kitchen was closed, I went into the town 20 miles away, did laundry and bought groceries and all of that. And I was very, very busy. And I was way beyond myself in what I was doing. I mean, I'd never done anything like it. It wasn't beyond me to do it, but it took everything that I had. And I discovered the extraordinary joy of absolutely forgetting my own position, because I was so busy serving everyone else. And I remember when someone walked up to me and said, "How are you?" And I was actually startled to be addressed personally. And it stayed with me because it was such a wonderful feeling. It was like, well, I haven't thought about how I am in a really long time, because I'm just too busy to have my own egoic individuality really matter. And in that self-forgetfulness, I was so happy. I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. It was the beginning of a life of happiness, I would say, because I was beginning to understand the secret of the whole thing. How can we tell if we're making spiritual progress? When the I just begins to shrink away. We're just not thinking about it anymore. Self-forgetfulness. People think self-realization, when you first start, you get confused. I do everything perfectly, and so I have to always be thinking about how I am doing because I have to be perfect now. It's just the opposite. You just forget it. You forget yourself in the contemplation of everything that is so much more interesting than me. One of the first aphorisms I learned from Swami Vivekananda when I was 18 from his book, "Don't think about yourself and you'll be happy." It sounded like a koan to me at the time, but I finally begun to understand. Give, how can I serve? What can I do for everyone else? How can I love God? How can I give more? And it can't be a martyred kind of giving. It has to be a joyful. That's what Swami said to the woman who was taking care of, or the person who was taking care of their dying mother. Think about God. Do it joyously, because God is a God of joy. And then you forget yourself. Freedom, freedom, joy. That's how you can tell if you're growing spiritually. It can be judged also by your inner freedom from desires of all kinds, except the longing for God. Do we just lie awake and think of all the things we don't have that we'd like to have? Or are we just saying, how can I serve? By how free you feel from every test, including those of blame, opposition, and calumny on the one hand, or praise, popularity, and fame on the other. You know, the man of wisdom, as the Gita says, praise or blame, or Swami says, praise cannot make me better and blame cannot make me worse. I am what I am before my conscience and God. No, of course this is not easy. None of this is easy, but it's simple to explain. How can I tell if I'm growing spiritually? Well, somebody didn't appreciate me and upset me. Oh, I have more to learn. Or the opposite. So-and-so got very upset with me and I just was able to accept it calmly. And there was some truth in what they said and I accepted it, but the rest of it wasn't, so I just let it go. That's how you can tell how free you are inside and how when tests and troubles come, they sail over your head. And this is the way this also, see what happened when I met Swami and really learned the spiritual teachings, I finally had a point of reference. See, no one prior to that could give me a point of reference that made any sense to me. And I felt like I was just, well, actually, I said I felt like the puck in the ice hockey game of life, that a lot was happening, but I had no idea where anything was coming from, where it was going, why they were cheering, why they were booing. It just didn't make any sense to me. But when I began to learn self-realization, when I began to understand the teachings of the Gita, although it's not always been from the Gita that I've learned it, but it's all in the Bhagavad Gita, that there is a point of reference. Choose the sattvic, avoid the tamasic, let go of this constant, how am I doing? But how can I serve? How can I remain centered in the soul? How can I transcend this bundle of self-definitions? So he says, let's see, by your inner freedom from identification with success or failure, in the recognition that in cosmic reality, all human experiences are essentially equal. Everything that comes to you is the grace of God. Some of the gifts are more gratifying than others to the ego self, but everything is equal. The wave goes up and the wave goes down. That image, you need to hold that image at all times. The wave goes up and the wave goes down. Do you think the ocean says, oh, but I want all my waves to go up? Do you think the water actually cares whether it's going up or down? It's just the constant movement. That's what it says when all experiences are equal. Well, I'm young for a while and then I'm old. I'm at the top of my success and then I'm not successful anymore. Everybody loves me and now they've abandoned me. It's just the wave going up and down, and it's going to go up and down and up and down. Where we want to be is in the whole depth of the ocean. It's a challenging teaching. That's why there's so few of us. You are advancing when you see others, and when you see all others as allied to your own self, and your sense of identity expands to include everything. All of the above are signs that one is advancing spiritually. When you begin to realize, I am a part of all that is. That's why in our Festival of Light we say that several times. It's time to celebrate our own greater reality, for you are a part of all that is. The bees, the butterflies, the figs on the trees, the homeless man on the street, the king on his throne. We are a part of all that is. The storm, the sunshine. These are wonderful exercises that we can carry out just walking. Eric Monroe has developed this wonderful personal technique, which he shares in classes that he gives. And so for those of you who are nearby on Thursday, 2 days from today, he's going to be giving a class. Just to walk, to feel your unity, to feel in your very breath your love for God. He calls it love breathing, a form of walking meditation. He's written a lovely book about it. I'm highly recommending it because it's a practice. You don't have to just take his class. He has a book. Contact Ananda Palo Alto. You can find it all. But what it is, it's beginning to consciously affirm, I am a part of all that is. Because with Swami, as we said earlier in an earlier letter, Master encouraged us to affirm these realities. The mere affirmation brings us success. The most important sign is this, that your love for God is growing ever deeper, and you feel selfless joy in the thought of Him, or better still, in the actual perception of Him. Joy is the infallible sign of God's presence. And the absence of joy is an infallible sign of our moving away from God, not of His lack of presence, but our moving away from Him. Even in sorrow, you can still feel the joy of God. It's a less gratifying gift, but you can still feel it. There's a wonderful song that Swami used to sing sometimes, which was speaking of, excuse me, let me say this differently. It was a Bengali song, and one of the verses was, "Come to me as sorrow, because when I am sorrowful, I think of you always, because I cling to you in desperation. When I feel joy, when life is bringing me externally that, then my mind can wander away from you. But when I am in grief, I hold on with all my heart. So bring me sorrow." He said at the end of Master's life, Master used to listen to that song. Swami said at the end of Master's life, he no longer wanted more sorrow because he felt he'd had enough, Master had. Because, difficult. A Master, just like Jesus, think of Jesus, he comes to bring eternal freedom, and his gift is rejected. And he knows what that is going to mean for those who reject him. That's the sorrow that Master had. Last question. How can a person know how much merit he has already accumulated in past lives and how far he actually is from self-realization? Self-realization comes not as a result of merit, which is to say of good karma, but by the grace, the kripa of God. Kripa is the Sanskrit word for grace. God, my guru used to say, has disappointed many saints who thought in terms of their own personal gain instead of surrendering themselves completely to His will. In the last analysis, no one can know when God will come. God is no merchant to be bought with good works. The less we focus on ourselves and lose ourselves instead in the thought of Him, the more we find that we have Him already and that we have had Him always. This is the shift that we have to go through, and it's the shift from the Vaishya to the Kashatriya. The Vaishya is the second caste. Classically, it's the merchant. And the merchant is perfectly willing to give you a great, something of great quality as long as you give back and as long as the trade is equal. Okay? And so we get confused a lot of times as devotees, and we think like Vaishyas. We think, well, I'm going to do a lot of kriyas, I'm going to do a lot of tapasya, I'm going to do a lot of self-discipline, I'm going to do all these things, and then God will come to me because I've done all these things. In other words, I've paid the price, He owes me. But it's a Vaishya way of thinking. And it is calculated, It is self-concerned, it is measured, it is limited, and I'm doing it because of what I'm going to get. Now, the third caste is the Kashatriya caste. The Kashatriya is ideal. The Kashatriya does what he does because it is the right thing to do. He operates according to principle, according to ideals. And the characterization of the Kashatriya is the warrior, or the leader, or the king. But so many kings are not Kshatriyas these days. It doesn't even hold the image that we want. But the Kshatriya leader serves his people. He doesn't think how they will serve him. That's the Vaishya leader. The Kshatriya leader serves his people. And the warrior gives his life for the cause. He's not measuring. He's not saying, I will be so brave in battle, I will kill so many of the enemy, I will take the fort, for my side, or whatever it might be, and then I will get all this. Because he may die, he may get nothing at all. He may give the final sacrifice. You can't be a Vaishya and be a warrior at the same time, because if you're only thinking about what you're going to get, you can't do it. That's why it's characterized by a warrior, is that it's the right thing to do, it's for the greater good, it is the ideal, and that is how I will live. And as devotees, we have to move out of the Vaishya. We have to move out of the whole thought form that I'm going to measure, God's going to measure, when it comes out right, then by Jove I'll have it. Because it's all just trading. We have to become a Kshatriya. I do this because it is right. I do this because it is my only choice. I do this because it is my destiny. I will choose God. It's the only freedom I have. And that freedom I have, I will choose God. And then we rise to the Brahman level where there's no separation, where it's just God's will flowing through us. We have shed all the ego. That's the priest. I am just an instrument of God. But most of us, we're oscillating between Vaishya and Kshatriya. And it's a very, very important principle to keep in mind, because much of the time when we are confused, it's because we have lost our idealism, and now we're trying to make a trade. And that's never going to bring us what we want. As he says, the less we focus on ourselves and lose ourselves instead in the thought of God, the more we find that we have him already and that we have had him always. So that's next to the last lines in the book. The last line in the book is, I hope these answers prove helpful. And so I think I'm going to just usurp that as my own. I hope this series on Swami's wonderful book has proved helpful to you. And then as Swami always signed his letters, in divine friendship. God bless you all.